While at IBM, I was involved in both the tech industry and tax policy. I will briefly discuss some of the history of tech and the role tax played. I hope to provide some context for the recent tax proposals for the digital economy, which are the topic of our webinar today. Often overlooked are two key features: investment and risk-taking. Let's walk down memory lane and see how this played out. Historically, hardware and software were physical in nature and inseparable: vacuum tubes, wires, and switches. In 1964, IBM launched System 360, which represented the birth of the software industry. As software became unbundled from hardware, computers no longer needed to be programmed individually for the specific task or customer. More important, IBM bet the business by making a $5 billion gamble, valued at $41.5 billion today, for a new product that would cannibalize the existing product lines. Tax accommodated in 1969. The IRS agreed that software, like hardware, should be expensed and treated as R&D. For treaty purposes, withholding tax was applied to software revenue as it was considered to be an intangible, thus royalty income, until 1998. In 1976, Apple launched its first personal computer. Then in 81, the IBM PC emerged with the DOS operating system developed by both Microsoft and IBM. Application software began to proliferate. Tax rules in the US accommodated the industry further with the enactment of the R&D credit for both hardware and software. From a treaty point of view, a withholding tax on software became untenable due to the large cash need for new investments and the enormous losses incurred by these new companies. The US foreign tax credit cannot be utilized if there are losses. In 1993, the World Wide Web became available commercially. This led to a boom in startups. Investment flowed and fear of failure vanished. To support the industry, in 1998, Regulation 861-18 was enacted, which characterized certain software transactions as copyrighted articles, meaning goods. Now such software could fall under Treaty Article 7, business profits, while only some transactions relating to copyright rights would continue to be subject to Article 12. That solved the withholding tax problem. Our colleague and friend Carol Tello worked at the IRS on these software regulations. The startup boom of the 90s turned into the dot-com bust in 2000, where only a few survived and nearly 80% failed. There was an overwhelming loss of invested capital. Nevertheless, both the IRS and the OECD continued to support e-commerce. In 2002, the OECD issued a tag report on treaty characterization, which adopted much of the US -18 regulations. Governments did not want to kill the goose that would lay the golden eggs. Appendix C and D list some of the accomplishments of the OECD. By the end of 2010s, it became clear that innovation was not spread evenly across the globe. From mountains of failures, only a handful of successes emerged, mainly from the US and China. As we look to the future, what is of even greater concern is the uneven distribution of capital, investments, and risk-taking in most countries. One measure is to look at the emergence of unicorns, startups valued at $1 billion. The crop of potential future giants who may even overpower the shiny stars of today, as Apple did to IBM. Shocking. In a pipeline of 494 unicorns in 2020, there are 239 in the US, 118 in China, but only 137 in the rest of the world. The largest of them all is a hectacorn in China, ByteDance, owner of the TikTok app, which I'm sure you've all heard of. What accounts for such a large concentration of entrepreneurs, builders, and creators in so few countries? Are nations of the world satisfied to be merely consumers in the digital economy and thus avoid upfront investments and risk-taking? In a dynamic industry such as tech, if entrepreneurship, building, creating are important, then do any of the tax measures under consideration support these objectives? The digital services tax, a revival of withholding tax, OECD Pillar 1 and 2, or simply a consumption tax. I leave you with Appendix A through D in the app currently to view further details. And on that note, I hope you enjoy our webinar.